Hello there. Wow. 2 months have passed since the last weekly Wednesday show. Hello, Greg. What does Greg say? Winter is coming, should I say, finally. Well, I'm glad Juha's back. Thank you, Greg. Happy to see you here. Happy to see you here. I hope there are more of you guys out there. If not, I will have to work harder to get my audience back. Now let me see. The audio. Yep. Check. Picture. Check. And the connection seems, yep. We're online. All good at my end. Okay, how was it again? Welcome everyone. I'm excited to be back. A little bit nervous too. You're watching or listening to the weekly Wednesday live with, well, me, Juha Ruokangas, your humble servant, sometimes a guide, other times the apprentice learning from you on a mission from the gods and goddesses of fretted instruments. And before we begin, let me show you something. I prepared a little block of alder. It measures 30 times 30 times 30 millimeters. And this block of wood will illustrate an important point of our topic for today. Now, here I have a jar of water, and I'll drop the block of alder in like so. And okay, now we're all set. You'll find out later why I did that. I'm gonna press it down a little bit with something that I won't. Yeah. We use a little weight here. Great. Nope, wasn't good. Maybe it's okay there as it is. We'll leave it. The mystery cube, we'll leave it there floating on the water. Hello, excellent molecule. Hello, Erling Hansen. Hello, Olenius from Estonia. Nice to see you guys here. Hey, TJ. All right. You'll find out later why I did that with the mystery cube of alder. All right. We'll dive in the deep end head first, and you can forget about the block of wood for a while. So winter is coming. What does it do to my guitar? Well, first of all, the word winter, it means very different things to each one of us. You out there in Florida, for you, winter means that the temperature drops at worst to maybe about 50 degrees Fahrenheit, which is like plus 10 degrees Celsius. You know, whereas here in Finland, for example, it is quite normal that the temperature sways at, say, minus 20 to minus 30 degrees Celsius. That's like minus 5 to minus 20 Fahrenheit. And it could stay down there in those freezing cold temperatures for weeks, maybe for months at the worst winters, especially in the northern parts of Finland. And in any case, in our country, the temperature stays typically well below the water freezing point for months in a row. That's like very typical. So yeah, winter is different for us, depending where we live. So instead of winter, the key words here are in fact temperature and humidity. Temperature and humidity. An example. You know, if you live in a modern house with controlled temperature, with controlled humidity, And if you never take your guitars away from that controlled environment, then your guitars don't experience winter. You know, let's say you have 21, 22 degrees Celsius temperature set into your high-tech home. That's like 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And you have that temperature in your house around the year. And the relative humidity is controlled to say 50% also around the year. Then there's no problems. In such high-tech environment, winter doesn't do anything to your guitars because there's nothing for the guitars to react to environment-wise. So for you guys in Florida, wherever you are in the world, who live in such high-tech homes, you can stop watching the show here. There's nothing more for you to see. You don't have a winter from your guitar's perspective. Often enough, though, well, we don't. Our guitars don't live in such strictly controlled environment. You know, if you live in a country where with a recognizable cold season that lasts more than a few days in a year, you would typically have some kind of a heating system anyways built into your home, to your house. What kind? Well, that depends. Like here in Finland, our winter is typically so cold that if we don't have, first of all, like properly insulated walls, windows with multiple layers of glass, modern houses having like triple or even quadruple glazing, and a proper heating system that keeps the temperature in our homes somewhat stable day in, day out, from week to another, month to another, we'd be in trouble, like serious trouble. It's a matter of life and death in countries like that where the winter is so cold. So we have to have pretty heavy duty systems to keep our homes warm. Or in some other country, say England or maybe Ireland, where I have relatives, well, you guys have a pretty short winter as compared to ours, but it's pretty chilly as well. It's wet and it can be cold with the seaside environment, but it's not bad enough. So you would not survive with a more well, let's say, the lack of better term, like not so heavy duty heating system that you might even use only when you're in the rooms. Like you come home and you notice, oh, it's so cold, let me turn on the gas heater in the kitchen. And you turn on the gas heating in the kitchen when you're there until you switch the heating off. You go to the living room and you start the heating in that room. So that's another way of heating your home. So a lot of us, we live in a place where your home is heated during the cold season. And if the heating is on constantly through autumn to spring, like we have in Finland, keeping the temperature steady, in our case, between 20 to 22 degrees Celsius, around 50 Fahrenheit again, this kind of heating system and what it does to our guitars, it has a bit different effects to a guitar than if the temperature would fluctuate up and down a lot during the cold season. Gas heating on and off repeatedly, temperature moving maybe between 10 to 25 degrees Celsius from day to night. Colder days, warmer days. In the winter, it's not so bad, so you survive and your guitars survive. But like it was in the imaginary scenario I had from England or Ireland. So the question is, which one is worse for the guitar then? Steady temperature through the winter or the temperature jumping up and down? Well, a steady temperature would appear to be better for a guitar, but it's not really that simple. And to understand why, we need to talk about humidity first. Because if a house has a central heating system that keeps the indoors temperature steady through the winter, but that house does not have a central humidity control, which is very typical, at least in our country. It's quite rare to have a humidity control through the cold season. It means that the relative humidity of the air we breathe in the house, it tends to get very dry. The heating literally dries the air. It dries our skin and it dries the air. Finland is an extreme example of this. Typically, the air humidity, the relative humidity of air in our houses can sink down to less than maybe, under 20% during winter time. And it could be like that for months. And that's very dry. Whereas in comparison, the example from England, the indoors temperature goes up and down a lot, but the humidity of air doesn't follow quite as quickly. So in such a house, the humidity would not likely drop as low as it does here in Finland. And even if it does momentarily, the average level, the humidity of the air will stay higher. Maybe it will be somewhere, I'm just assuming here, somewhere in the range of 30 to 60%. Please understand, these are examples, assumptions to illustrate the idea. But in any case, you get the idea. So which one is worse? Below 20% relative humidity for months, or humidity level swaying a lot up and down? Well, before answering to that, we need to understand what does air humidity even has to do with your guitar. Because this is a question I get quite a lot. You talk about adjusting, you talk about this and that with guitars, and you talk about humidity, but it's not like obvious to a lot of people that, wait a minute, like air humidity and this is my guitar, what the heck do those two things have in common anyways? Well, most guitars are made out of wood. And most likely your guitar is made of wood. Could be otherwise, but most likely. Statistically speaking, your guitar is most likely made out of wood. And wood is a living material. What does that mean? When a tree is cut down, sawn into blanks and dried, depending on how exactly the wood is dried, the method used, the time, how long period of time is it they're using for the drying. So the piece of wood eventually will be, let's call it now, dry enough. So different kinds of material goods are made out of that piece of wood. In one extreme, these material goods are made, mass produced in big factories, and at the other end of spectrum, it might be cultivated by individuals such as a guitar maker here in Finland, for example. Today we're not discussing these methods in drying, how to dry wood or something like that. Instead, I'll just cut to the chase. Okay, so you remember our piece of alder in a jar of water. Now, even with the most careful drying process that takes for many years to complete, could take a decade. And after that seasoning process, even if the pieces of wood are thermally aged the best possible way to stabilize the wood, it still won't agree to die completely. Let's test now if my theory holds. You can repeat this test at home, by the way, but preferably do it with a cube of wood and not with your guitar. Don't sink your guitar into your bathtub, okay? I'm not responsible for damages caused to your guitar by that. I'm just drying the piece a little bit. Okay, so let me see. The cube is here. and it was 30 times 30 times 30 before I put it down. And now we measure again. From end grain to end grain, I'm getting 30 millimeters. Maybe 30.1, but I think no, maybe it's 30. But here, measuring the quarter sawn, I get 30 point, definitely 30.1, 30.2, and the flat sawn direction, yeah, 30.1, 30.2, between somewhere there. Okay, I can't show it to you here with this camera, with this lighting and things, but I can tell you that this cube has become slightly bigger than it was a moment ago. So we have scientifically proved a fact that you can Google from other sources as well. Wood doesn't swell much in length, end grain to end grain. It swells more in the quarter sawn direction, and you know, even if not necessarily a big difference, here I couldn't spot any difference between the quarter sawn, flat sawn. But yeah, this was an extreme test and a very short one to give us quick result. But I assure you, if I would have, instead of putting it into the jar of water, if I would leave this piece of wood into a room with the air humidity at, say, 90% up to 100%, as it often can be in the summer, and in certain countries it could be like even around the year or more or less. So, you know, the result would be similar as with this water jar test, you know. So, and this piece is thermally aged alder, extremely stable, but it still moves a little bit from humid environment to dry environment. It changes a little bit. In a very dry environment, the wood will breathe out and become even a bit drier, you know, shrinking a tiny bit more. And this shift is really slow. 1 day of super dry doesn't affect anything. 1 week might, 3 weeks definitely will do something. And when the environment becomes more humid, it will adapt again slowly by breathing in week to another, a month to another, a bit of moisture from its surroundings, swelling just a bit bigger than it was in the drier room. And this continues like forever, this kind of behavior of wood. Okay, Ulenius says, to be honest, I thought it was gonna swell more. Well, if I would leave this piece of wood overnight to the jar of water, it could swell maybe a tenth or something more, but this is a relatively small piece of wood. Consider the fact that when you have, for example, acoustic guitar top, thin plate of wood, and across its width, it could, like, let's say, expertly well seasoned, aged, dried top wood, it could still move a few millimeters, that big plate, across its width from the change between summer to winter. Not dried so very well. A very new guitar facing, let's say the Finnish winter for the first time in its lifetime, the guitar top might crack because the stress is too big for it. You know, it shrinks, but it doesn't. It it's glued to the side, so it has nowhere to go. So all it can do is eventually crack somewhere, you know. But yeah, it's not. To Ulenius, who thought it's gonna swell more. It's not a sponge. It's a dried, thermally aged piece of alder, so it won't change a whole lot. But at least I got some little bit of excitement out of that test, a scientific test. Never done that kind of things before, at least on the live broadcast. But this is actually, I'm kind of being sidetracked here a little bit, but this type of tests are actually something that we would do, for example, if we have a new material that we're interested in using. So a typical example would be one of the modern substitutes for exotic wood, for rosewood or ebony. So we would do this kind of things. We would put a piece of this new material into a jar of water and see how it reacts to that. We would create like a little controlled environment with water and salt, and we know that adding so and so much salt to the water, we get the air humidity to stay within a certain spot, certain range, so we can and putting the piece of wood into such controlled hermetic box, we could then, after weeks or after some months, we could judge something, that whether this material seems to be potential or like it's worth of testing more, or maybe even making a prototype instrument out of it. Because one thing that I don't like is that, talking about our guitars and our guitar making, one thing that I really hate to do, and I would not do, is to sort of use the customers as the research development guinea pigs. That we take a material we haven't used before and we make a guitar. How can we guarantee that it's gonna stay good over the test of time, when the material has existed for a year or 2 years of new material, man-made material, for example, or a tone wood that we don't have experience with. So we're very careful with that kind of stuff. Anyway, that was the marketing moment of my guitars on this Weekly Wednesday Live episode 40. A sip of water and we'll continue. Yeah, so I was talking about the environment getting drier, getting more humid, and the wood keeps breathing slowly forever. Over time, that breathing of wood gets less and less, though. The wood does become more seasoned, as we say, in other words. This is what seasoning is about, partly. It's like when you're seasoning tone wood, preparing it for making guitars out of. So you would want the wood to go through these changes of climate, the dry season, the humid season, the dry season, many times, because when the wood goes through these extreme changes repeatedly, the moving becomes less, and the wood starts slowly reaching its, as we call, the equilibrium moisture content inside. It is always going to move a tiny bit, but less and less over the years. And in our context, this of course means that the wooden parts of an old guitar will move less than the wooden parts in general of a new guitar. or a guitar made of carefully dried, seasoned, thermally aged materials. Won't move much, but it still does a bit, resulting in a need of adjustments periodically. But it will still be different from an instrument made in a different way, without these cautious steps taken. So now we can answer to the question, which one is worse to your guitar, a long period of time in very dry environment, or the humidity swaying a lot but doesn't get quite that dry on average? Yep, the longer the dryness continues, the more dramatic the effect to the wooden parts of the guitar. So now we're at the very core of our topic, our question, aren't we? What happens to my guitar when the winter comes? And actually, I've already answered it, but now distilling it to one sentence. If the relative humidity drops in the room you keep your guitar in, the wooden parts will eventually react to it. In case of an electric guitars and basses, the part affected the most is the neck, usually. Even a very slight change in the guitar neck wood humidity will make a noticeable difference. How do you notice that difference? Well, the strings are higher from the frets. Why? Well, because when the wood is drier, it becomes slightly less rigid. It will give in more to the pull of the strings. The strings will pull it a bit more when the wood is drier. And next summer, when the air gets more humid, the neck will go back. Yeah, that's the noticeable difference. The strings are higher from the frets, typically in the winter, if the humidity in your room where you keep the guitars is less than it was in the summer. So what do you do then? You adjust the bridge saddles down to compensate? No, you don't. You adjust the truss rod. And if you don't know how, watch my Zen videos, links in the description of this video. If you're listening to the podcast and you don't have the access to this YouTube description links, just go to YouTube and do a search. Put the 3 words Zen truss rod. Zen truss rod. And my videos will pop up at the top. Yeah. Excellent Molecule says, I saw that the last winter on the fretboard of my new guitar. Yeah. This is perfectly normal. So don't worry, it happens. It's gonna happen this coming winter again. So okay, now the video is done. Half an hour went. No, okay. Let's try to look at this a little bit more from different perspectives. What else does the winter do? And can I avoid the effects? Can you avoid the effects somehow? I'll go now through the most frequently asked questions. Very helpfully collected for me by Emma. Thank you, darling. So I'll just go through these questions and answer them briefly, because it's all about the same topic, kind of same ideas, thoughts that pop up to many players. So what could you do to avoid the need to adjust? Because it's just a drag to adjust over and over again. So does a room humidifier help to the extent that you don't need to adjust anything? Yes and no. Yes, but only if you keep it on continuously, so the room humidity really doesn't drop. Excuse me. so the room humidity doesn't drop down for a long period of times. So it's a constant effort from you, depending on what kind of humidifier you have. You need to keep it going then through the heating season. This is the same as those high-tech homes that we talked about, with temperature, with humidity control around the year. The more evenly balanced you manage to keep the indoors environment, the less the guitars will react to anything. If you manage to keep it, say, even at the humidity at 40% through the winter, the guitars won't most likely react in any way, because there's nothing to react to. There is no winter for the guitars from their perspective. Yeah. Well, does it help to keep the guitar in its case? Not really. The humidity inside the case is the same as the rest of the room. So it doesn't do anything. It's just more difficult to play because you need to get it under your bed and wherever you keep the case. So, follow-up question to the previous one: how about a humidifier in the case then? You might be familiar with the humidifiers. I've even heard about a misconception where someone thinks that it helps to have a what is it called now? A gauge to measure the humidity in the case. But obviously that's just the gauge. I mean, it's just measuring the humidity. It doesn't do anything. It's just a pretty thing in the case, but it doesn't do anything. But a humidifier, well, you might be familiar with these guitar humidifiers. The ones designed for acoustic guitars, they can be a bit more helpful if you really have the patience and persistence to keep them moisturized through the winter. So they can be helpful for an acoustic guitar, with those thin plates that we talked about. They can prevent a solid wood top, back, or sides from cracking, but a guitar neck, it reacts much slower to humidity change than a thin wooden plate such as an acoustic guitar top. And your guitar case most likely isn't a hermetically closed environment either. So my advice for storing your electric guitar bass is instead this: keep it so that it's easy to reach, so you play it more. Playing more. That's more fun than keeping it in the case and forgetting it there and not playing. Okay, what about gigging musicians? What if the guitar has to be left into a cold storage or the trunk of the tour bus? Well, as you can imagine, gigging musicians get the hardest beating in this regard. No doubt. Their environment, it changes constantly, often dramatically, overnight from summer to winter conditions, literally, when traveling around the world. And quite frankly, this is the ultimate test for the tool value of a guitar. A guitarist, and often if it's a very successful band, they have also technicians. So the technician's question or the guitarist's question: is the neck of this guitar stable enough to travel with? And so on. So for a gigging musician, I'd say, if avoidable, don't leave your main instrument to unknown storage houses or to the tour bus. And one tip could be this: that you could use a thermally insulated guitar case if you can, because then I mean, this is still, I mean, it's just the case if there's no active way of keeping the guitar warm in the case, the temperature inside an insulated guitar case will eventually drop also. But if it's insulated, the temperature inside the case will adapt to the outer temperature slower. And a slow change is always safer than a fast one to not break something. A very sudden change in temperature could break something. Could break, well, most typically, I mean, if your guitar is nitrocellulose finished, it will almost certainly break the finish. It will crack the finish. But this is unavoidable over time anyway, so this is why nitrocellulose finished guitars are cracked. And the older they are, the more crackled the surfaces are. Yeah. But thinking, you know, for example, an airplane cargo space, it is really seriously winter conditions. So, yeah. I'm seeing we have more people joined. Tomi Viitanen, hello, nice to see you here. Kai Randell, hey Kai. Nice to know that you're back, all of you. What if I choose a guitar made out of a wood species that reacts less? Well, yes, of course. This is something, in the long run, this kind of guitar choices is something that you can affect. If thinking of the guitars you have right now, well, you know the answer, but yes, different wood species can be different. And especially, you know, have to remember wood species alone is not the solution. As already discussed briefly, it's also how the wood is dried, how the wood is seasoned, and so on. So when choosing a new guitar, I've said this on earlier videos as well, when talking about buying a guitar. I can't remember which episode was that and what it was called, but there is out there somewhere these weekly Wednesday shows where I talk about buying a new guitar. We had a great discussion pretty early on about buying cheap guitars. We talked with who did I talk to? With HP42 channel, yeah. So we had, we had a good discussion, and you can find that on the backlog. When choosing a new guitar, always do as much research as you can. Don't believe the sales pitches of the manufacturers, of the makers. If I do a sales pitch, don't believe it. Always rather search information from elsewhere. Try to find a more cohesive image of what this company, what this maker is about. From your peer-to-peer network, on forums, on Facebook groups, and so on. If you can't find anything about the maker, about the manufacturer, if it's just like zero, there's nothing, time to be a little bit suspicious. Why isn't there anything about this maker out there? It's weird. Is this the first guitar they're making that I'm buying? And so on and so on. But if you really like something and you can't find it, you feel you can't find enough information, ask the maker to give references. Ask the maker to give you contacts that you can talk to who own their instruments. So maybe it's not a perfect way, but it's at least something to grab on. Yeah. Well, then there is one question that popped up at some point. Someone was kind of wondering that if if you play less, do you need to adjust less? It's the playing that will kind of make things wear off and kind of go off. So if you play less, you don't need to adjust. Well, if you don't play at all, you don't need to adjust anything, right? Because you don't play. So, no, sorry. Seriously speaking, no. Playing less doesn't help. The more you play, the better you learn to know your instrument, and the more comfortable you'll eventually feel about adjusting your instrument too. So if you're a bit scared to adjust, it's okay, it's understandable. It's that way for most things we're not familiar with. We've all been in that situation with our guitars as well. But I assure you, you can learn. And I can guarantee that after you've taken that first baby step in learning to adjust your guitar, the most of the fear vanishes and you will feel accomplished. You'll feel a tiny bit happier person at that point. I have a good question there from Erling Hansen. I will get back to that in just a second. First, I will mention about the electronics. What about the electronics? Does the winter affect to the electronics? Well, again, the key word is humidity. A drier environment is actually, generally speaking, good for the electronics. It's the high humidity that will corrode your guitar volume or tone pot or switch controls. Obviously, again, a better quality switches, better quality potentiometers, they will last longer, and really high quality toggle switches by Switchcraft, for example, the surfaces making the electronic control, they're made of special metal that doesn't corrode easily at all, or gold contacts in switches and so on. It is because this pure gold contact, it doesn't corrode, and this is good as well. So anyways, especially if you, again, to the environment, if you live by the sea, often the high relative humidity together with the sea salt, it just kills guitar electronics. I've seen it happen. It does the same to metal platings and oxidizes brass and oxidizes metals more and so. But it's not the end of the world. There are great contact sprays available to keep your pots and switches well maintained. And there's another Zen video, the one I did together with my son Salas. It's a long video, but Emma was very kind and added timestamps to that video last week to all the different steps of the guitar maintenance, the setup we did in that video, and you'll find a link below in this video, the exact spot where we clean the electronics of his guitar, my son's guitar. And when you check, while you check that video out, you'll notice when you check the description of that video, the Zen setup video done together with my son, you'll notice in the description the rest of the timestamps that it lists there, really detailed, all the stuff about cleaning your fretboard, about adjusting basically everything in that particular guitar. So it could be a helpful video to check out. Okay, guys. Let me see. There was one question, which will be the last, not the first question, but the last question for today. And then it's time to call it a day. Erling says, what about poly-lacquered neck and fretboard? Isn't that quite hermetically sealed? How much humidity passes through that? Well, this is a valid, very valid question, and something that I have often pondered about that, shouldn't it be this way, that you would have a polylacquered neck, and even if the fretboard is done the same way, isn't that quite sure way of the neck not to react so much? And for whatever the reason, it doesn't seem to be the case. So the only explanation to me is that polyfinishes, unlike the common myths go about with the not breathing, with the polyfinish not being non-breathing at all, it kind of cannot be true. Something must go through the finish, because the winter, the summer, the humidity changes affect to polyfinished necks pretty much the same way as, let's say, nitro finished necks. I would say that the bigger, there's some kind of a difference and some kind of a logical behavior that could be detected. Let's say you have a maple neck that is oiled. Well, an oiled maple neck is one of those necks that, let's say, an oiled maple neck with ebony fretboard. And there we have a combination that will most likely move more from winter to summer to winter to summer than that same neck would move if the neck would be polyfinished. The oil being part of the reason, and the rest of the reason being the laminated structure of maple and ebony. And this is, of course, means that maple plus ebony, or mahogany plus ebony, or Spanish cedar plus ebony, any neck wood, commonly used neck wood, laminated to glued to an ebony fretboard, or a ebony fretboard glued to that neck, will move slightly more than a neck with rosewood fretboard or maple fretboard or birch fretboard, and as far as I have experienced, and my experience extends to the 26 years of my personal guitar making career, in addition with all the long discussions with colleagues, also much more experienced colleagues than myself. And this combination, or let's say ebony being the hardest and the most rigid wood species used in guitars in the fretboard of all wood species. It is the heaviest and the most rigid tone wood we use. And that tone wood laminated to another wood, it's simply the fact that the two materials glued together are so different from each other, so that it creates some kind of a tension. And I think that's more the reason in that case. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question very well. I answered something like a panic answer, I guess. Punija says, you have a builder, fixer, luthier question I'll leave in the comments of this video. Okay, you can do that. I appreciate that, because I have made a promise to myself that now that I continue these videos, that I will do my utmost extreme effort to keep these broadcasts at 1 hour maximum, preferably a little bit under, for several reasons. Let's not go into that deeper than that. I'm sure. I mean, one of the main reasons is that I feel embarrassed of sometimes, babbling away for an hour and 45 minutes. It's crazy. It's like a, going to cinema, for God's sakes. Long episodes, and you guys are there, and I'm keeping you. I'm taking your whole evening away from you. So, yeah. So let's try to keep it at 1 hour. So, Poo Ninja, yes, please send your question in the comments of this video. At some point in the future, maybe not so far in the future, we will also do again an episode with question and answers for builders, for guitar repairs guys, and so on. So I would love to get those questions as well. So that's most welcome. Okay, guys, gals, that's it for today. If you know someone who you feel should watch this video or listen to the podcast, please share to that person. And thank you again for Emma for helping me out with this episode so much. It made a huge difference. Next week, we will talk about the big picture of guitar design. Where is the electric guitar going next? Or have we seen it all already? Don't know about you guys, but I would certainly love to know the answer to that question. So I'm a little bit nervous about bringing it up. I don't have an answer, so I'm going to probably be just going to be back of my head brewing for the coming week, and so we'll come up with something. But sometimes it's just fun, I wanted to announce this this topic now, partly so you would know what I talk about, so you can either already put it to your calendar or skip it if that's not something that you're interested in. But even more importantly, I wanted to announce the topic for myself, so I couldn't duck. I couldn't avoid tackling it, because it's a very scary topic, I think. So, yeah, have we seen it all? Where's the future of electric guitar going to be? Talking about guitar design perspective. So please leave your answer down below to the comments of this video. Your answer, the future, the design of electric guitar. Where is the future going to be? Your answer below to the comments of this video, so we can discuss about it next week. Thank you for your continuous support. Feels good to be here again among peers, among guitar-loving people. Remember to take care of your loved ones. Be well, stay safe, peace, love, and good music.